Hi guys, this is Nadia from Imbali Crafts, and today I want to show you how to make these stars as part one of my Gothic heart earrings. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because I upload new stuff on a regular basis. I quite often make kits and PDF tutorials for the videos I put up on here, and I'll pop a link in the description below. I also have all sorts of gemstones, square and half round wire, some beads, and all sorts of other goodies on my website. So take a gander over and see if there's anything you fancy. Last but not least, come and join us in our wire wrappers and metalsmiths group on Facebook. I'll also pop a link below. Right, let's get started. The design is based around a prong setting. So the way I've done this basically is create a gallery wire setting, which there's a tutorial for if you want to only do that. But in this case, it also adds the sort of star design around it, which is not a variation of the Icarus design. And the way this works is I'm going to create 4 or 5 prongs depending on the size of the stone. And the prongs need to be just long enough so that they sit, the stone can sit into the gap that the setting is going to create, and that the prongs will reach over the side of the stone, but not too far that they hide too much of the stone. Quite often prong settings, the prongs are too long and they fold over all the way over on top of the stone, and you don't see much of the beautiful design. So always try and keep that the prongs short enough. So I'm going to grab, and I think roughly that's about 8 millimeters or so, something like that. That'll be enough. And I'm going to be doing all the prongs like that. If you have a tool, you can mark it. In actual fact, you can use one of these. This is a very fine flat nose pliers because these are all the same length, so you can actually use this as a guide. So if I were to use this, I'm going to fold this up. So if I were to use this as a guide, I would come in between, and I can use this as a gap, and I can also use it as a length guide wise if the prongs are going to be the same size all the way around. So it's quite important to keep these as equal as possible. And this is quite easily achieved if you have a tool. You can see here this is the same width at the top as it is at the bottom, so you can use this as a sort of guide. And we're going to make 4 or 5 of these, and the spacing is roughly about, depending on the size of your stone, for anything smaller than this I would go about 1/2 centimeter, and this is about 8 mil. Obviously you're just going to have to play around a little bit with the sizing and see what works for you, because obviously your setting will be tighter than mine or looser or whatever, so you're just going to have to work out what sizing works for you. Right, so I've created these prongs. I've made about 5 of them, and as I said, try and make sure that they are the same size if possible. And for this design, for this sort of size stone, I'm going to use 0.5, which is in between your 0.4 and 0.6. I think American gauges, this is in between your 22 and your 26 gauge, roughly there. So anything in between. I just found that the 0.6, the 22 gauge, was slightly too thick for this design, and so we're going to use this. So obviously, play around with the gauges that you have. If you want, you can use slightly thicker wire for the base, and then you can use your 0.6 22 gauge. Just make sure that the gaps in between are a little bit larger, because the rays will take up more space if the weaving wire is thicker. Okay, so to start up, and also the only 2 wires that are going to remain in this design are these 2 wires, which is the inside wire and your prong setting wire, and the others are going to be removed as you pull them out to create the rays. And so let's get started. So I'm going to take my weaving wire and I am going to wrap it around the first base wire once, like so. Then I'm sliding in the wires with the prongs. Like so. If you have a ring mandrel, like one of those wooden ones, you can use that to hold these wires in place as you move along. Next, we're going to wrap the weaving wire around wire 2. So I'm going to refer to these wires as wire 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, just to make it a bit easier to explain. So bring it up, bring in the next base wire, which is wire 3, wrap it around wire 1 and 2, bring in wire 4, wrap the weaving wire around wire 2, 3, and 4, bring it in, and then last wire, which is wire 5. I mean, you can add more if you wanted to, just bear in mind you'll need to make bigger gaps. Maybe you need a bigger stone or use less prongs to make the rays fit. So we're going to go around wire 5 once, and now what we're going to do is we're going to travel back. So we're going to do the same thing as we did. We're going to go up around wire 2, 3, and 4, ignoring wire 5, come back down in between wire 1, 2, and then wrap around wire 2 and 3 only, like so. And next we need to bind wire 1 and 2 together with one wrap, as we kind of hold the sort of wire where the stone sits on in place. Just shift this out of the way a bit, and then this is kind of the first pyramid sorted. And now we're going to create the same sort of design in between all of these pyramids. So it's always important that you have enough space to, so it's good to maybe try this design without the prongs first to see how much of a space you need in between the prongs, depending on the gauge weaving wire you're using. So now we've added in all the wires we're going to be using, and if you wanted to, if you struggle to hold all these wires in place, you can use one of these, which is a wooden ring mandrel. I don't actually know where the wedge is for that. You get those that have a screw as well, so you can, if you struggle to hold all the wires, you can place these in here, and then you would kind of wedge something in here to hold all the wires in place. Some people find it useful. Okay, so now we're going to continue with the exact same weaves. You may, I think, may not fit all of them in there, so you may need to only have one wrap around wire 1 and 2 per gap. I think I left a little bit too little space, so we're going to see. So I'm going to attach 1, and then I'm going to go in between wire 1 and 2, repeat exactly what we did just now. Oops, need to go 1 up. Go in between here, so that's now around wire 2 and 3. Come back around wire 2, 3, and 4 as we go up. Make sure that this is in focus. Go around wire 2, 3, and 4, and then we go around wire 3, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and then we're just going to work our way back. Struggling to open these gaps like that. And if you find you can't fit the wire in the gap, sometimes it helps to just push the weave back a bit, because obviously the wire is quite thick and it takes up a lot of space, so you can just adjust by pushing it in a little bit like that. And there's enough gap. So you may just need to add this up. We're going to go around wire 2 and 3 and As I said earlier, we don't have enough space. So we're going to go into the next gap and wrap around wire 1 and 2 there just once. So we've got enough space. So that fits in there. We're going to repeat this until we have created all the rays and also one on the outside. Okay, so I've created 5 rays, or 6 I think it is, and it helps when you finish to actually take a pair of flat nose pliers and very gently squeeze them down. That will flatten out the weave, even everything out a little bit, like that, and strengthen the wire at the same time. So you can see it already looks much neater now. And then the next step is we're going to be removing all of these wires from the outside. It's going to be pulling. If it doesn't want to come out, just use a pair of pliers. One, and the second one. Obviously, as you go further down the weave, when you're pulling these out, this will be harder to remove. There's more resistance. Shouldn't be too bad. So this is the end result. And now the next step is to actually shape it. Like that. To bend these wires outwards, and then if you have something circular like this, you can use that to help you shape. You can just pull these 2 wires around it, and that will give you a nice round shape, and close it off as well, like that. And at the same time, you can give it a little bit of a twist, like that, to close it off. Obviously we're going to adjust this a bit more. So I'm going to make this nice and round, and we're going to tie this one wire, the left wire, to the right wire, or the other way around, whichever works best for you. Alright, so I'm going to take this off. So now this is nice and round. I'm just going to double check that the stone kind of fits in there. There we go, that'll be okay. So set this aside, and normally what I do with the other design that I've made for this, the Icarus design, I made a bell with this, but I want to make earrings with this design. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to trim off these wires because we don't need them. Normally I don't cut wires until right at the end. I'm known for that. But in this instance we don't really need them. So what we're going to do is we take these innermost wires and we're going to wrap one around the other, kind of like a rosary link design. So I'm going to bend this one out of the way and bend one wire upwards, and then the second wire from the other side is going to go round. I'm going to pull that very gently, and we're going to create a wrapped loop with it, like that. You may need to tighten it up with a pair of pliers. So it's very roughly, and obviously the setting itself is not exactly round. You can adjust that. It's quite fiddly when the stone is that small. That's okay. So what you can do, when you see there's a little bit of a gap here, you can actually twist. Once you've tightened that up, pull this out, you can use a pair of pliers and you can twist, and that kind of pulls it a little bit tighter, as you can see, and that is the setting. So the next step is to just make this round again. So you can use a pencil or a mandrel or whatever you have just to round this off again, like that. So we're going to do that, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I'm going to trim off the wire that I've used to wrap around, and we can tighten this up a little bit more by placing the chain nose pliers or flat nose pliers around it and then twisting on the actual wrap, which tightens everything up a little bit more. And that's the setting so far. So next we're going to do away with these wires here. Now you can create little details, or you can just twirl them at the back and put them out of the way. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with them yet, actually. And in actual fact, I'm going to get rid of these wires as well, because we don't really need them at this point. There you go. So now we're left with these. In actual fact, I'm going to work away these later. I'm going to create the wrapped loop here first. So pretty simple, like we did with the first wrap loop. It's basically just a simple rosary link. Obviously you want to keep it as small as possible, so it's like a 90-degree loop like that, and then we're just going to keep the loop fairly small, wrap it round like that. So these tend to get a bit in the way. Trying to keep the focus. And all we're going to do is wrap this wire around a couple of times, and obviously keep this as small as possible and as neat as possible. So we're going to wrap this round and then trim this wire off. Okay, so I've wrapped it and just going to trim off this wire at the back. Just try and trim it so that you can still kind of tuck it away to an area where it doesn't actually scratch. So now we've got these wires left, and we'll actually deal with those just now. So now we need to actually bend the prongs to seat the stone, and I always try and have only a little bit of the prong seated over the stone. So actually you could have bent these prongs before closing the loop. It's a little bit tricky like that, so I'm going to place a pair of pliers, and I am just bending a little bit like so, just so that a tiny bit of the prong sits over the stone like that, and later on you can actually press down when the stone is seated, and that will encase the stone. Obviously when you have a bigger setting, a bigger pendant like that, it's much easier to bend the prongs in this case. So we're just going to do all of them, and then we're going to seat the stone. Okay, so I've bent the prongs over, so now we can just snap the stone in place. So I'm ever so slightly going to move these outwards so there's a bit more room to seat the stone, and you can just press it in, and then that should nicely slide in place. And then we can kind of close the prongs over the stone by pressing down. And as I said earlier, if you have a little bit of a bend in the prong already, and if you're pressing on the back of the prong as well as the top, that kind of closes it off and presses the stone into the setting like that. It's not exactly round, but it doesn't really matter for this one. So you just want to make sure. So you're going to work your way around that, make sure that everything's seated properly, and then we're just going to do away with these little wires that are left over. Okay, so I've seated these. So we're going to do now these wires. I'm just going to create a tiny little swirl. So I'm going to bring this round like so. Doing the same with the other side. And this also helps to keep the stone in place. Like that. Make sure that it's nice and symmetrical from the top. Going to trim this off. roughly about here. And then I'm going to create a little swirl with the end. So I've got my very fine tipped round nose pliers. I'm squeezing the end, create a tiny little swirl just to sit on top like that. Obviously adjust it, make it look nice. We're going to be doing the same on the other side. Okay, so I've trimmed off all the wires, and the next step is to actually bend out these shapes. So we've got these little rays on each side, and I'm going to come in. I've got very fine tipped pliers. These are actually watchmakers pliers. They're really, really handy for that sort of thing. So I'm going to come in, and I'm going to grab, I think, the third one on each side, or second one on each side to start off with. I'm just going to bend it outward slightly. Do the same with the next one, and I'm going to leave the middle one, and I'm going to grab the next one in line. You can see how these fine pliers are really helpful in this case. And we're just going to bend these out. If you can grab the last one as well. I think it's quite a tight sort of fit. So I'm just going to do these outer ones first. Like so, second. And you just keep working your way around that until you've got them all done. And then the star looks, or the snowflake, or whatever it is you're planning to do with this, is going to look like that, which is quite pretty. Right, so I'm going to finish this off, and then next we're going to do the earring hook. So to do these earring wires, I usually cut 2 wires, same length, and I'm going to do the ear wires at the same time so that I keep them as symmetrical as possible. For this, I've used at the moment 0.8, which is a 20 gauge, but 1 gauge lower would probably be better because not everybody's got the large earlobe. So what I'm going to start off with the end, if you have an ultra flush cutter, bring these in and make a nice fine cut. And I also like to bring in a jeweler's file just to make sure that any sharp edges come off. You get the tools that are like bezel cups, which you can use as well, and this will round off the edges. You really don't want anything sharp near earlobes, so before you do anything, make sure that it's nice and smooth. The next step is use some round nose pliers. What I recommend doing is you mark your pliers with a koki pen, as we call it in South Africa, or as it's widely known everywhere else, a marker pen. It doesn't really help that it's black, is it? Can't see that too well. So I mark it here so that you make the loops the same size all the time. So I'm going to grab the end, and I'm just wrapping this around. So I'm creating this small loop. This is where you attach whatever design you're going to make. Next, I'm just going to create a bend in it. So again, I'm using my round nose pliers for that, or you can use the very fine tipped pliers, watchmaker pliers if you have any. So pull this nice and straight like that. So you've got essentially what is a I think an O-ring hook or something like that. Some people use it for attaching things to earrings as well. So I'm grabbing I think a 2mm bead will be enough. I think that will fit nicely into that, like so. So that looks okay. So you can use a bigger bead if you wanted to as well. That works all right. And next I'm going to cut a small piece of 0.4mm wire, which is your 28 gauge, and I'm just going to create wrapped loops. You can make it as long or as short as you want to. Just going to trim this off, and then to make sure that it's nice and tidy, I'm going to unwrap some. Obviously count the amount of wraps you do so that you have the same on each side. So that is the detail attached. And next we're going to make a very fine, sharp bend just above this loop we've just created. Nice sharp 90-degree bend like that. And if you have any of these bail making pliers, you can use these. If not, you can use anything that has approximately, I don't know, I think this is about 5-6 mil wide. You can use that. I'm not sure which size I'm going to use. I think I'm going to go with the smaller one. So you wedge it in place and then simply roll the wire around it like so. And then we're going to cut off. You can leave it as long or as short as you want to. And again, obviously come in with your file. And just tidy that up. And then all you're going to do is just attach the ear wire to the design you've just made. And the way I do this, obviously I'm sure most people know, but for those that are new to it, you go sideways rather than opening it downwards, as that distorts the loop. And then we're just going to put that in there and then close it off again, and the ball will help to keep the wire. And that is how you make these. Super easy to make, and they're quite handy. If you don't have any available at the moment, you can just make them yourself. And that's that. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button because I upload new stuff on a regular basis. If you fancy, come and visit us on our artist group on Facebook. It's called Wire Wrappers and Metalsmiths Worldwide, and we're a great fun bunch, so come and join us. As I mentioned earlier, I have all sorts of kits, gemstones, and tutorials on either my website or my Etsy shop. So go and visit the link below and see if there's anything you fancy. Last but not least, come and visit me on any of my social media. I've got Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and obviously YouTube. As always, there's links below. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching.